Hi everyone, I am Angela with SEO Rocket. Thank you for joining us today. We're talking about using storytelling to make your marketing stand out. And today I have with me two special guests this month. We have Elliot Strunk, and he's up there, and Todd Coates, they are the co-host of the very popular podcast, Two Designers Walk into a Bar, which is sort of affectionately dubbed a love letter to both iconic design and pop culture, two really cool things to put together. The peanut butter and jelly, right?
Mm-hmm.
How fun is that? So today we're going to talk about storytelling and how that affects your marketing, right? Every business marketer always they want more, right? You want more traffic, more leads, more people to your site, more people in your door, which of course we all hope will ultimately lead to more sales, right? And to have the more, you also need to be more memorable. You really need to differentiate yourself and stand out. And this often means endearing yourself to your prospects and building that relationship with them. And how can you do that? A great way to do that is with storytelling, making yourself stand apart. So today, Todd and Elliot are here today to talk about that. And of course, who better than these guys as co-hosts of a podcast where they tell stories every month on their podcast. And I have to say, for those of you, if you haven't heard their podcast yet, I absolutely 100% recommend that you give it a listen. It's on their website, their archives on there. You can hear them all and sign up for the newsletter so they'll let you know about the new ones that are coming. And you have a new one coming up soon, right?
Yep.
This week, yeah.
Yep. Okay, awesome. So the fun part about this podcast is it tells you all these quirky backstories, the details about not only the artist that created these iconic images, and that, things like road signs and movie logos and brands and, t-shirt designs, all kinds of fun stuff that you've probably seen your entire life, but you didn't really know the story behind. So even if you are a designer or if you're not a designer, it's really interesting. I found it to be very entertaining and very informative. So that is my shameless plug for you guys, but I mean it honestly because I really enjoyed listening to those podcasts. And with that said,
we just want to say there's no shame in plugging us. We do it all the time.
Yeah, be as shameless as you can't be shameless enough for us.
But hey, you know what? It's okay, because when you're in a bar, talking about design, talking about marketing, it gets a little shameless sometimes. But that's fine.
Todd and I leave shame at the door whenever we go into a bar.
Cheers.
Cheers. I've heard you
drink
been
out
of an Applebee's. So
no, we don't. No, not Applebee's. But it was another franchise casual dining establishment that you might go to in Australia. We'll just put it like that.
Okay. All right. Things were blooming. Got it.
That's right.
Got it. Things were blooming. There were peanuts on the floor, and then y'all were kicked out the door. Understood.
That's about. Were you there secretly?
Yeah,
did you bear witness?
Security footage too.
It's the time of technology. Who knows? It could be caught on video somewhere. Someone's camera, someone's phone. Got it. All right. Well, it sounds like there's a story behind that I can't wait to hear later. But for now, I want to hear about your storytelling and marketing.
As Angela mentioned, first of all, thank you to Angela and SEO Rocket for giving us this opportunity to share this information. And what we would like to present to you today is information about using storytelling to make your marketing stand out, or as we like to refer to it, wit and wisdom from Todd Coates and Elliot Strunk, hosts of the podcast Two Designers Walk Into a Bar. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We have a few things. So first of all, why we're here today. Second, the importance of stories. And as Angela mentioned, how stories really help with your marketing. And then how good stories will stick with your audience. Some helpful hints using stories to build traffic. And then using social media to complement your efforts. And last but not least, we're going to have a Q&A. Now, speaking of our lack of shame, like we mentioned earlier, when people ask good questions, they are going to get some fun prizes. So please have your questions ready for us. Okay, without further ado, you're probably wondering, who are these guys? Who are Elliot and Todd? What's their deal? So basically, a little bit of background on the two of us. We're both marketing communications professionals, and we've also taught. So we really like mentoring and teaching folks. And as Angela mentioned, we love pop culture, and we have a podcast. We're syndicated on all the major platforms. So this happens to be one we like called Podbean. So, wherever you are, wherever your phone is, that's where you can find our podcast. So Two Designers Walk Into a Bar. It's about design and pop culture, as we've mentioned. And then this is the website that we have put into the world. And you might see some language that looks a little bit familiar. So what we try to do is make sure that everything is consistent, that we have consistent messaging for our audience. So we provide a number of different ways that people can find us. So speaking of storytelling, Todd, I think you have some wisdom for us about this.
Well, the audience will be the judge of the wisdom quotient, but I do have a point of view, and both of us do, Elliot, as you know. So what we're going to talk about is, as both Angela and Elliot have mentioned, is how can you really take the concepts of storytelling into your marketing practice to drive better returns. So this is probably familiar. Stories are as old as mankind. They're how we teach each other, it's how we communicate to each other, and it's how we learn. Stories make information sticky to the audience, if you think about it like that. So think about it. I bet none of our ancestors passed along family traditions by cozying up to the warm glow of a PowerPoint. Do you? No. I doubt any child ever asked to be tucked into bed and read a beautiful status report. No, not going to happen. Stories make information sticky, and stickiness is what makes you and your brand stay in the minds of audiences. So let me ask you a question. How many times have you heard stories start this way? Once upon a time. A lot, I bet. You've probably heard it a million times. Probably you've heard it more than a million times. And we're gonna show you probably heard it way more than a billion times. It loses its stickiness. It turns into a cliche. So we face the same story challenges in the marketing world. Often differentiation is difficult, and our customers end up with too many options, no clear affinity for our brand, and worst of all, confused. A compelling and consistent story gives you leverage, and it can differentiate you against competitors. And by the way, our competitors are not just other companies that sell similar goods and services. There's a lot out there in the World Wide Web, and Elliot's got a few numbers to run past you.
Right. So let's start with the number 70,000. So big number, what does it mean, and why should you care about it? So this is information coming from HubSpot, which is a service that we've all heard of and probably some of you use. So Google performs at least 70,000 search queries every second. So think about that. Every second, there are 70,000 search queries. So what does that translate into in terms of the bigger figures, right? So that's 2 trillion searches each year. I mean, that's crazy. That's 167 billion a month, 5.5 billion each day, 228 million an hour, 3.8 million per minute, and 63,000, plus per second, right? Around 70,000. That's a ton of information. So, you read at a rate of about 3 words per second, just to give you an idea. So think about how fast you consume information versus how quickly Google consumes information and spits that information back out to you. And remember, this is all at least. So it's not like this traffic is shrinking. In fact, it's growing. Mm-hmm. So if you just think about what Todd was just mentioning in terms of direct versus indirect competition, whenever a search query is performed, that is a lot of stories, right? So if you think about a typical search that you do on your phone or on a web browser when you're in front of a laptop or desktop, think about all the results that come back, and then think about at the bottom of the Google search results page, how many additional pages there are that you can't even see. So that is a lot of stories. And then, Todd, tell us a little bit about keywords, because I think that's an important part of SEO and an important part of storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. It's the foundation of good storytelling and obviously great SEO and SEM. So if you think about keywords and the concept of that, keywords are what we read, it's what we recall in our memory, and it's what we search. On the next couple slides, I'm going to break that down a little bit for you and kind of show you how we use them, and you can probably pick up on some of the tactics and techniques that we use. First of all, there's branded keywords and non-branded keywords. When we do publicity, we use a combination of both branded and non-branded keywords. Branded keywords are searched by Google specifically related to the content that you create. The searcher knows and recalls your branded information, and they're very likely to see your content because of that. If we search Apple computers or Two Designers podcast, you're likely to get that type of information. Your audience, first of all, has a memorable touch point to start with. They see it some way, strikes a nerve. This can be through outbound communication, word of mouth, or past experience. They think, Two Designers Walk into a Bar podcast. Sounds interesting. Next, what they do is they search using those terms that they recall. If they use our branded keywords, like I just mentioned, it'll show up on the search engine results page, often called a SERP. This serves up our content much higher than our competitors' content because the user has recalled our terms and used our branded search terms. The search queries, the options that they're given will be greatly narrowed in our favor. So branded keywords are very useful. Also, non-branded keywords are very useful as well for a little bit of a different reason. Non-branded keywords relate to the content without using any part of your brand name or any of the branded names that you may work under. Generally, the searcher is browsing, they're less brand aware, or they're doing a comparison. So the results may include our content as well as a competitor's content. The more consistently that we use those non-branded keywords along with branded keywords, and if we buy them for search engine marketing, SEM, the better our results will be. So if you think about it, the steps are very similar. The audience interest is generally piqued by a touch point. If they're less familiar with our brand, they'll be searching using words that form the story that they know. In our case, it would be pop culture podcast or something like that. So our content would show up, as would some other podcasts. And hopefully, if we've used the terms more consistently and more competitively, our content will show up sooner. The content appears using the unbranded keywords, of course, and Google ranks, of course, if we use them consistently. Like I said, Google will rank our content high, and this increases the likelihood that the content that we want to show gets seen first. So we're going to play a little game, and Elliot and Angela, I'm going to ask you to monitor the chat real quick. This will be very quick, but just to demonstrate a point of the value of what I just said.
Will do.
Okay, you see 3 logos here. The one on the far left in this white circle. What phrase comes to mind when you see this, or what few words? We'll just give you a second or two to think about that. Elliot, Angela, any words popping up?
I'm thinking of running and just do it.
Just do it. Yep, seeing that a lot. It's probably because, now don't quote me on this, but I think Nike has invested a couple bucks in that, in the just do it. We can research it, but probably a few bucks. Clearly they own that. It is aligned directly with their name. Now, if you look at the middle logo, what word comes to your mind? Elliot, what are you seeing? What do you think?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think of, or that a lot of people think of, I think, is curly fries, but I don't think that's the word. That's 2 words.
We know that's what Angela. We know that's Angela's favorite.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think of Ving Rhames and his authoritative voice, right? The meats.
Meats. Yes, Arby's has invested a lot to make sure we all know we have the meats, right?
With the horsey sauce.
Mm-hmm.
With horsey sauce and curly fries, obviously.
Horsey sauce and curly fries.
Now,
Right.
Last one, you guys are doing great on this. Last one on the far right, this brand. And everybody says
Safety.
safety. Of
Safety.
course.
Buckle up.
That's, of course, safety. Volvo is known for safety. And as a matter of fact, I did some research. And what's interesting is the National Highway Safety Board did a decade-long research study on the most safe automobile brands. And by far, the safest brand in the country is Honda. Record scratch. What?
Cool.
Yes. Volvo ranked number 7. So that doesn't mean that Volvos aren't safe. They're just not the superlative. So they have chosen something that is important, critical to the audience, definitely something that they can claim, that they can own as their tent pole. Everything they communicate around is safety. And again, doesn't have to be the superlative. It just has to be consistent, and it has to be audience centric. Elliot has another example coming up.
Yeah, speaking of audience centric, so let's say you're in New York and you're in the mood for sushi. So you pick up your phone and you say, wonder if there are any sushi restaurants around where I happen to be in the city, right? So let's say some different choices come up for you. And for all intents and purposes, it's basically the same thing on the surface, right? So what's the difference? What is going to get a visitor going to one restaurant over another, where there might be a few variables here? So let's say, you know, Todd, as you mentioned earlier with keywords, let's say that part of your story happens to be, hey, if you're looking for great sushi and you find yourself in Soho, or you're, you know, just getting off the subway at Prince Street, boom, we're right there. We're very convenient for you. So let's say you're thinking, great, but you know, it's late at night. Some restaurants tend to close down later at night. How late are you guys open? You know, are you open until midnight? And so what this does is it starts to provide these terms that allow you to differentiate and make yourself more special to the particular customer that you're trying to appeal to, right? So if you think about some other keywords that could potentially be used, when you think about things like restaurants, kid-friendly, good for large parties, a fun decor, whatever these words happen to be, don't assume that the audience knows enough about your restaurant that they automatically think of those things or they're familiar with those things. going back to Nike, Arby's, and Volvo, the reason they own the words they own, as Todd says, is they may have thrown a buck or two behind them. So let's talk about, Todd, some additional statistics related to this.
Right. So we look credible, Elliot. I've included a chart with a bunch of numbers and stuff here. So
man, that is so smart.
It's pretty credible.
Do you know what the chart's about?
Let me take a crack at it. Okay.
All right, go for it.
I'm not going to dig too deeply into this, but remember a few slides ago, we talked about memorable touch points that will spark the person searching for terms. This chart just shows that offline sources, those touch points, will drive online searches. Now, the first one, if you look, TV ads are driving the most search there, 57%. Close behind that is out of home, billboards, transit, bus, things like that. And then it really gets pretty close on the other bar graphs going more to the right. If you want to visit a Facebook or Instagram page, or looking for something posted on Twitter, things are pretty close there between radio ads and TV ads. Now, why this is important is for two reasons. As I said before, offline sources will drive those search results, so you want to spend your money effectively with offline sources. And secondly, I love television. I love producing television. It is not as inexpensive to produce as some other forms of media. And you can see that the results, if your focus is around SEO or SEM, the results are almost the same for a radio ad, if you want them to go to your social media channels or things like that, or for an outdoor ad, if you want them to search for you. So point being is, remember that there are some great sources for offline tactics that have to marry up with your online tactics. Your offline tactics, if you're doing television or out of home or digital banner ads, must use the same keywords that you want people to search for, or else how would they know, right? How would they find you? So that's a lot of background on sort of the mechanics of storytelling and how it works with getting across a message in that sort of complicated trail that people will get to find you. Now let's think a little bit about your narrative now on the next slide. So how can you use storytelling, branded and non-branded keywords, to help tell your audience what makes you different and to be effective in your marketing? Ellie and I are going to start by telling you a little bit about how we approach it, and then possibly you can see yourself in that as well.
Absolutely. Let's jump in here. So we have a few different ways that we approach storytelling, of course, when we're thinking about new episodes for our podcast and new topics to cover. So when we were thinking about the podcast in general, Angela at the top of the presentation talked a little bit about it, and we've reinforced that with our messaging, this idea of design and pop culture. And from time to time, people have asked us, how did you arrive at this idea? Like, what, and why did you guys, visual guys, why did you choose, podcasting as your medium? It's not exactly a visual medium, right? It kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive. But as we've been talking about, we use design as really the gateway to this larger form of storytelling. And the artifacts that we use are really the springboards for getting into these shared stories and these shared experiences. So we don't drill down so specifically into a topic that it doesn't allow for the sort of accessibility that would come if somebody is not a designer, but they really enjoy the topic that we're talking about or have some particular affinity for it due to a childhood memory or a part of the country they grew up in, or any number of these other things when we started to hear from people giving us specific episode feedback. So point being, start with an idea that is big enough to provide flexibility, something that it has shelf life, something that has longevity, something that is not going to paint you into a corner, right? So we have this pop culture umbrella, so that allows us to talk about a number of different different ideas through the lens of design and artifacts that have been created. So what does that start to look like? Well, you know, Todd and I have, if a movie could be a spirit animal, Airplane is our spirit animal. We both love the movie Airplane. Yes. As Angela mentioned, we have talked about things like road signs, very interesting road signs in some of these childhood memories. Mad Magazine is another one of our North Stars. Todd and I originally started the idea of the podcast, in fact, because we were talking about one of the preeminent artists for Mad Magazine, a gentleman named Mort Drucker, who had passed away recently, about a year ago. And so that was really our kickoff point. Things like advertising mascots, of course. So Big Boy, everybody's familiar with Big Boy restaurants, so the story of that. Or things like wacky packages and some of these other parodies and lampooning consumer culture. To civic design, things like a graffiti artist turned presidential portrait maker when you think about Shepard Fairey and his origin story. You know, we've talked about Ready Kilowatt. How do you get something as abstract as a utility? How do you put a character behind that? And then we also use things like audiograms to help convey little tastes of our story as well. So we'll listen to one of those really quickly in just a little while when we start to think about some of the different ways that we share these stories beyond just some of the artifacts. But the trick here is that with these physical artifacts, as we mentioned, you know, you can start to see this is a very visual medium, as we've talked about, and we start to make sure we have episode pages for each of these topics. People can go in, they can look at more videos, they can get more episode notes. All of this information is out there. We have robust visuals they can look at on their phone. And actually, we had a great insight from one listener who said, you know, the best way to really enjoy your podcast is to have the episode page up while I'm listening to the podcast, because then I get to sort of walk through and see everything that you guys are talking about. So we love the fact that it's really a multimedia sort of experience. You know, we take great pleasure in that. So Todd, you want to keep rolling and maybe we can start telling these guys a few stories, right?
Yeah, you mentioned something a few minutes ago, Elliot, with the great sign from Holiday Inn. You called it an interesting story, and I think probably a lot of the listeners to the webinar today wouldn't think of it as being an interesting story, and that's the secret to what we found with our podcast and with great storytelling is the what. What's that extra little oomph that goes beyond the who, the what, the when, the why, the where to make the story more sticky? We always try to look for that when we're comparing these things that we talk about in our podcast. The what adds differentiation to the story. It also adds differentiation, sorry, if I get going too fast, that word trips me up, to your marketing story. Think about the sushi bars that Elliot showed you earlier. What if one of them catered to special occasions, anniversaries, or one of them catered to teen parties? You know, think about it like that. That's a differentiating factor that will help you stand out even more. Think about ways to surprise and delight your audience that they may not know about you. Deliver something interesting that's audience-centric and unique to your brand. And think about now how you can put that into your story that you're crafting. We'll show you a couple of examples of how we've taken the what into some of our stories to give you an idea of how this might work, and hopefully to give you a little bit of tease that there's so much more to the story than you might think. The first one, both of these are iconic, but the first one Elliot's going to talk a little bit about, and I bet you recognize it right away.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. So let's go to the chat again and let's see what people are going to figure out here. Okay. Is there? We should probably come from the perspective of, is there anyone on the webinar today who does not know what this logo represents. That would be a better way to go about it.
You're probably not able to use the webinar if you didn't know what this was, right?
Right. And what's awesome about it is you can be nostalgic for it, but it's also, we're still enjoying it today.
Yeah.
New generation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, of course, this is the Ghostbusters logo. Everyone is familiar with it. Ghostbusters came out, of course, in 1984. I was 11 years old. And if you listen to the episode of the podcast where we talk about this, I somehow begged, borrowed, and stole my way into the theater 3 times that summer with 3 different groups of people to see this movie because I love this movie so much. And another thing I mentioned in the podcast is that as an adult, I love this movie so much. When I saw the DVD for sale 2 different times, I bought it twice. Second time not knowing I'd already purchased it. So Todd, I guess I still owe you that copy I promised you.
Well,
I'll
at
get
least
it
you're
in the mail
consistent.
soon.
Yeah, you're consistent. That's good.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Speaking of consistency, let's talk logo. All right. So there is, of course, a story behind this logo, and it's a great story. So it's definitely rooted in pop culture. So it's rooted in the pop culture of National Lampoon magazine. It is rooted in the pop culture of things like National Lampoon's Vacation. The designer of this logo is a fellow named Michael C. Gross. And among the other things, he was art director of National Lampoon's magazine. And he also worked in the movie industry, obviously. He also created props. And one of the props he created was the Deluxe Family Truckster from National Lampoon's Vacation. So that god-awful station wagon that is in metallic P, as we all love, our favorite shade of automobile paint, that is from the same mind as the Ghostbusters logo. So why this logo? Well, really, the logo, of course, is very iconic. It has the international no symbol. It has the circle with the slash through it. It's great in that the ghost, of course, is bursting out. You know, it kind of looks like Casper or whatever. But it's brilliant in a couple of ways. One way is that it's very simple. It's really only 2 colors. It's black and it's red. So it's very striking, very iconic. Another reason it really works is there is no language barrier here. You know, it's pictorial. So as a result, it's very easily identifiable by people, even if they can't read the phrase Ghostbusters. And then a couple other things that I think make it memorable. One is that it is actually in the movie itself. This guy who designed it, some of his other jobs outside of magazine was he worked in the advertising world, and so he knew how logos would work. He knew how to package things. And so, of course, in the movie, the logo appears on the side of their vehicle, Ecto 1. It appears in patches on their uniforms. It appears in, if I remember correctly, a television ad for them, among other things. And so, you know, it's over the door in the fire station where their headquarters is. So it not only appears for the movie, it appears in the movie, but it is not in any way, shape, or form forced. And then the reason that there is no verbiage associated with it is when Columbia Pictures was releasing or getting ready to release the movie and they wanted to tease the movie, there was one problem that they had, and that is that another group owned the phrase Ghostbusters. And so they didn't know if they were going to actually be able to use the word or words Ghostbusters in the movie to promote this movie. So as a result, when they wanted to start generating buzz and getting the word out there, they simply released posters, teaser posters for the lobbies of movie theaters with only this logo on it. And that really helped in conjunction with a trailer that you, of course, would see on TV or see before other movies. Really helped it to become iconic even in advance of the movie itself coming out. So a lot of pop culture here to unpack, but this is just a logo that I love so much. just because it just is fond memories of my childhood and my son's childhood as well. Now, as Angela mentioned, it's multi-generational, and all the parents who saw Ghostbusters have now, of course, introduced their kids to it as well. And speaking of New York and pop culture, Todd, I think you have a great story for us as well.
I do. On the next slide, I would say I bet everybody recognizes this band. Right, of course, this is Kiss. This album is from 1976, and it's quite different from other album covers of the time, including previous album covers by Kiss. The designer who conceived this kind of nod to Midways and Daredevil shows, conceived it to complement that sort of traveling carnival-like atmosphere that was a Kiss performance. So, I mean, it became a pretty unique looking thing, and at the time when albums were sold in stores that you had to go to, it certainly stood out. So, in digging into it, it was a little interesting to find out that the guy who created this, the band was from New York, and the guy who created this was from the New York area. He grew up near and around the Coney Island area. So this kind of flaming wheel of death vernacular that you see here was in his DNA. It looks like kind of a sideshow sign, or a sign that you would see for a ride. That's a pretty interesting background story, but that's only part of the story. Because if you notice, there are 4 ways to view the cover. No matter which way you turn it, it was always going to be right. That's because the band was originally conceived to be 4 distinct personalities, like the Beatles with Mikado makeup. Think about it like that. Now, at the time, this was 1976, at the time of this release, they had just had the biggest hit of their career, the song Beth, which was written and sung by the drummer, who had been causing a little more trouble than his talent could cover. So the band was experiencing the pressures of immediate fame, all of a sudden, immediate recognition, and this was creating a lot of internal turmoil and rifts that were developing. And what was really happening right now is they were wanting a way to unify the band so it looked more like everyone's contributions were important. Everyone was driving the popularity. So to ease tensions in the band, they allowed everyone to be on the top position. Now, if you know anything about the band, you know that they would go on to have a couple members leave not long after this album came out. But at the time, fame was immediate. It was the first time they've experienced this, and this was a design way to hopefully show that they are one cohesive unit, and obviously pay homage to that carnival-like atmosphere. So this was kind of the what that we were discovering when we were talking about stories like this from 1976. This we have another complement to this on that episode, and the one that Ellie was talking about, Ghostbusters, was in our movie logos episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and I think that's an important lesson here, is that these were 2 things that we originally found out separately for different episodes, and yet depending upon how you weave the story together, you can make those relatable as well. And I think that brings us to our next point here, which is essentially always deliver your story with a unique style and tone of voice. Always be authentic, always be genuine. And as we've mentioned before, use this sort of terminology, use some of this flexibility, some of this larger thinking, to make sure that you're really telling your story in an interesting way to an audience that is going to get excited about it. So some of the ways that we choose to do that is whenever we have episodes, with each episode, we always have unique collage art. And before we reveal the full art, typically on the day before the episode drops in our social media channels, we'll have things like teasers where, part of the artwork is revealed through some sort of tearaway before revealing the artwork itself. So this happens to be artwork that we have for an episode on street culture. And so we talk about Ed Big Daddy Roth, and we talk about the Santa Cruz Screaming Hand. We also celebrate our listeners. We are always asking for listener feedback. We love feedback, and we really want to make sure that these folks are in the spotlight as well, and we really appreciate what they're doing and the fact that they're subscribing and listening. And then there's some general fun images reminding people to listen. This was when our YouTube channel debuted. We wanted to go ahead and showcase that a little bit. Then we'll also insert ourselves into pop culture. I have a soft spot for this movie as well. It was released in the early 80s, similar to Ghostbusters a few years earlier. But what I like about this movie, A Christmas Story, is it was actually filmed in Cleveland, the town I grew up in. And so my family loves this movie. And so this was a post that we did around the holiday, where it's this idea of how can we sort of insert ourselves into these pop culture moments. And we happen to have stickers, so this was a really good way to kind of plug the fact that we have stickers, and it was sort of a fun visual riff. As we've mentioned before, obviously we have speaking engagements, we have other things that we do, we have blog posts, and so we're always trying to reinforce this bar idea of being in the bar, and our blog posts and other things are sort of dispatches from the bar, notes from the bar, that sort of thing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we also do fun multimedia things such as audiograms.
What was interesting to you when we first were talking that a couple months ago? I was cleaning my porch and you called me, which that was interesting to me. And then I had a conversation. So what was interesting about that to you that got us this far?
If I remember correctly, one of the things that kicked the conversation off was you and I were talking about so the famous, of course, Mad Magazine, among many other jobs he had over his 91 years.
And what a giant influence he was. And we started talking about how great Mad Magazine was, and we pretended that there were studies that were done that said if you read Mad Magazine, you certainly had higher than average IQ and things like that.
I think they actually published that study in Mad Magazine.
Oh, that's what I saw.
So that's always fun to give people a little bit of a taste of what some of our episodes are about in just a nice snackable format. So Todd, you want to jump in with some additional thoughts here?
Yeah, so in wrapping up, we want to just talk a little bit about how we insert ourselves into, use our social media to insert ourselves into the story. We use it to connect to dates. If you recall that, or events, if you recall the chart earlier that showed how media and search are interdependent, think about ways that you can use integrated media to add more color to your stories, and always use consistent keywords for your marketing materials. So for us, social channels, we use it to build our audience by connecting to dates and events, as I said, that relate to pop culture. We celebrate weird observances like National Donut Day or things like that, highlight people or events that are connected in some way to our podcast. We share interesting finds and blog posts that we create, and we promote listener quotes and speaking engagements. So we want to make our listeners the star. So let me give you a couple tips here. First of all, always use the consistent hashtags that relate to your keywords, tag others who would be interested in your content, and encourage reposting and reviews and comments whenever you can. And above all, post and engage with others on a regular basis. This is a way that you can build your audience. Most of all, is to really just participate in a consistent way. Invite others to your conversation, participate in other people's conversations. So in short, hopefully if you can pull all of these things together, this will mean that storytelling can help make your marketing stand out even more. So that wraps it up for us. We thank you for your time and participating with us today in this webinar. We thank SEO Rocket for giving us the opportunity to talk to you. And we have a couple minutes to have some questions if there are any.
Hey guys.
Yeah, and as we shift into question mode, sorry, Angela, I was just going to mention as we shift into question mode really quickly, for those of you who are interested, here are some of the different ways that folks can get in touch with us to visit our website, find our social media accounts, and start to track our podcast down and hopefully subscribe and continue to listen. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks guys. It's great info, and I appreciate you sharing that so that the folks that are watching at home can find you, because I do think, really seriously, everyone, you should give them a listen. It's a lot of fun. I have some questions for you. I took notes.
Oh, good.
But I do have some questions. So the first one is may or may not be easy for y'all to answer. We'll see. Probably is though. It's a pop culture question.
Oh.
Right. So which actor that has appeared in your presentation today also appeared in another Christmas movie?
Trying to think of the actors that appeared in our presentation.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Peter Billingsley.
Yeah.
Oh, no, great. See,
Where else have you seen him?
To be a champion.
It's another Christmas. And you
he was actually in it.
He's actually in it.
Wow.
Can
Can you give us the movie, or will I give it away?
Okay, the movie. Okay. Well, here's a hint. The movie is set primarily in New York City.
Narrows it to
Down to 15
Half the movies that have been made.
And
Yeah,
it wasn't on 34th Street.
Okay. And would you say it was in the 20th century?
Yes.
Or 20, okay. Just trying to focus.
There was
Is it
no
William
dance.
Shatner?
There was some singing.
Oh, they're singing. Okay.
There is some singing, although it's not a musical, but there's no dancing.
Okay.
And I can give you the answer if you're.
I'm stumped. But
We love this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. I'll give you the answer. It was Elf.
Oh.
Peter Billingsley
yeah.
is actually one of the elves in Santa's workshop in Elf.
Oh my goodness, that is great trivia.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
That is wonderful.
Awesome.
All right, awesome. Yeah. Hit us with another one. We'll redeem ourselves.
I don't know if I have any more. I could probably get you some more Elf trivia though, because I'm a big Elf fan. Anyway. But okay, so I'll give you an actual like marketing question. How about that? So y'all mentioned the what, the differentiation, the what, and also too, like tying that together. You guys had mentioned in your presentation that you like to use, the user feedback, the visitor or viewer feedback, rather, listener feedback, and that you get from them. So I kind of wanted to ask you, in the matchmaking of it all, there are things that we do every day in our businesses that are just like everyday things for us, that you never really think are unique about us because it's part of our daily job or our daily routine, and we've just really become blasé and, just don't even recognize it anymore. How can we, as marketers, business owners, salespeople, what have you, whatever our role is, how can we identify these different things in our business that do make us stand out, that do answer that what, that do differentiate us and put that unique spin that you talked about on our messaging across the board in the different marketing mediums? How do we even identify that? How do we find that? You know, we're so blind to it often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Yeah, Todd, I'm sure
you want me
you
to
have
start,
some.
Elliot, and then you can jump in if you have one. I have a really simple answer. One of the greatest sources of inspiration is to dissect what your competitors are doing. Look at their keywords, look at their website, look at their online presence, look at as much traffic as you can that they're getting, dissect them, and then do something different. That really is the easiest source of inspiration, is know what others are doing. When I work with clients, at my day job as a brand strategist, and when I work with clients, you would be surprised how often they are so internally focused on themselves and getting their message out that they haven't seen if it resonates with the market, because others have similar messages.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I have to say, like, when we in the SEO world, when we're doing, say, a competitive analysis of someone, or you know, for a client, that's one of the places that we start. You know, we look at their competitors and what they are doing. How are they eating your lunch right now? You know, what's going on there, and then what can you learn from that? You know, how can you improve upon that? So that's awesome. It's interesting to hear that applies to other aspects of marketing too. Good to know. And I want to thank you guys, because you did a really good job of going through your like curation process of, you know, hey, you know, this is what our audience is looking for. How do you keep that in mind? Like identifying what your audience needs and wants, and you know, making sure you give that to them in a way that is, you know, interesting, not just, hey, we're all good, you know, we're just kindred spirits here. Like, you know, there's so much thinking there. You have to go through a thought process. Can you walk us just very briefly through your thought process there?
Elliot, you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you know, as that question's being asked, two things pop into my mind. I think the first thing is like, would my mom understand it? If I were telling the story, you know, would my mom understand it and find it interesting? Because my mom isn't a designer and doesn't have a design degree, but my mom, you know, likes stories. And then I think the other thing is, are we bringing something unique to the table? You know, Todd and I happen to have a very long list of topics that we've brainstormed for potential episodes. And one of the things that's wonderful about working with another person is, you know, one of us will say, hey, you know, I have a thought about this certain topic or this certain design object or whatever it may be. And, you know, for it to be part of pop culture, a lot of times it's been seen about and written about before, right? So if we're going to talk about it, we have to bring something unique to that story. And that's really where the research component comes in, is if as we start doing research, if there's nothing additional there beyond kind of what we already sort of know, then there's really no there in terms of peeling back the layers and adding any value with us telling the story. It's really simply conveying something that's already out there. So I think going back into us both being, you know, enjoying pop culture so much, if we're digging into something, if we think it's a good idea, like, yeah, like, okay, you know, you've convinced me this is an idea worth pursuing, let's dig into it. And we find something that truly surprises us, like we made a joke, I think in at least a couple episodes, that one of our favorite topics apparently is creative lawsuits. You know, there's always like a lawsuit that seems to be happening, like as part of the backstory about some of this stuff. And our running joke is we're actually going to shift and just do a podcast about creative lawsuits, because we seem to keep finding those. So I think that's one of the things, is like going back to touch on one of the things in the presentation. What is the value that's being added? What is the unique voice or perspective that we have? And then also, I think the other thing, just to kind of wrap up my answer, is connecting the dots and drawing these thematic associations between two things. Like there are times where we maybe have the object first, and then it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, is there another object or thing out there that would match this? And if so, what is that theme? Other times we have a theme in mind, but then we need to go out and find a couple objects that not only will work, but that we think the general public, i.e. my mom, will actually know what it is and understand it, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act.
Absolutely. All right. Well, great. Well, that's great information, and it's good I appreciate the feedback on that, because it is interesting, because I think we all need to really learn to think of ourselves as storytellers, and not just, pushing out, just vomiting information on people. We really need to sort of think of that, more transparent, yet, dare I say it, kindly or gently way of sharing this information for everyone. So thank you for bringing this today. I really appreciate your time, guys. I'm gonna go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We have, bar mix. We have our drinks we need to finish up. We need to toast all of the attendees on today's webinar. And a little bit of an additional toast to SEO Rocket. Thank you once again.
You're so elegant with the martini, Angela.
I know. With olive. Olive. Yes.
Classy.
I know.
We need to be more classy.
We do need. Yeah, can we spell it with a K though, so it's extra classy?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Angela, you're gonna have to cut us off because
Okay.
We'll just keep going.
Let me just wrap you up. I won't cut you off. I'll leave that up to between you and your sponsors. But I will wrap you up by saying that if you have not had enough SEO Rocket webinar yet, we have another one coming on August 18th. This one's going to be really fun. This is how to discover fast, quick SEO wins with an SEO audit. So we're going rogue on this one, y'all. This is going to be a live panel discussion. It'll be really fun. We've got Tom and Zane, two of our SEO specialists that'll be on there we're actually having, and pop it in the chat if you want, submit your web address so that we can actually do a live audit during the webinar of your site. So does your site have issues? Does it need to be on the therapy couch? Let's go ahead and find out what they are. Submit away, folks. We'd love to include you in this audit. It will be fun. It'll be free information. This is, normally, an advanced SEO audit will cost you just under $400 to get that done. But if you submit it to us, we will do it for free for the first two who submit to that. So please join us on August 18th for that. You can go to SEOrocket.com and register for that to attend that webinar and see it live. Looking forward to it. All right, guys. I guess we do need to wrap up and all of us cut ourselves off, but thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the attendees, and I hope all this proves useful and actionable to you. I know I picked up some great hints and tips myself. I know you will as well. So thanks, everyone. We will see you in August.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.